That's what everybody is, armchair GMs when it comes to the trade deadline. Here's my indecent proposal, but it just might tip the Oilers' favor, and the fans might like it. More than 50% of them would like it. You trade Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and a defenseman to Buffalo for Taylor Hall. What do you think?
It'll never happen.
What? Come on.
It'll never happen.
I know you're trading your first rounder from 2011 for the one from 2010, but you'd solve a bit of a problem. Then you don't have to sign RNH. You get, I don't know what defense.
But then you only get Taylor Hall till the end of the season.
Well, then you sign him because Buffalo's not going to take RNH unless they sign him.
But then you still, but then if it, okay, I can see that then. But where that is only if is Draisaitl playing center?
Yes.
And then who's playing left wing? Is Hall playing with McDavid?
Yes.
Hall can't play with McDavid. Hall can't play with McDavid. No, Hall can't play with McDavid because they both like to carry the puck up the ice.
Well, maybe Hall is older and wiser and more. It can figure it out now. He can be the one-time shot.
That is not going to happen.
I tried. Okay, that's why they pay Ken Holland.
That is not going to happen. No.
That's why I'm not employed by an NHL.
I would suspect that,
along with thousands of other people who will probably be spitballing all the same things.
I suspect if he gets anything, it's just a third-line center somehow.
He's not going to be trading for a goalie. They're riding a hot-handed Mike Smith. He's your guy. Defenseman, I don't know how you would even try to add and subtract trading for a defenseman right now. The only positions they're going to be looking for would be maybe a top six winger, and you're right, a third-line center. Let's talk about what the possibilities could even be for the Oilers when it comes to finding a winger to play with McDavid at this trade deadline. Is that even something they do?
I'd say it's improbable. The left wingers that were certainly in play, or the wingers, I guess, it would be Palmieri, and he ended up going to the Islanders. Taylor Hall, but he makes $8 million. So even picking up Taylor Hall, that team has to pay $4 million of that $8 million. You're not paying $8 million on a cap hit. So I don't see a left winger, the Oilers finding a left winger, but it is such a black hole for the Oilers, a second line left winger. I guess Draisaitl or Nugent-Hopkins could play left wing with McDavid. By now, Dominic Cahoon is not the second line left winger. I think he's played enough games on the second line and doesn't have nearly enough offense to be the second line winger. And he's not a checker, Dominic Cahoon. So I don't know if he doesn't play in the second line. He doesn't look like the kind of guy that could play left wing. He's not Devon Shore. He's not Archibald if he plays on the left side to play in the bottom six. So they still need a left winger. Where that comes from, I don't know. But you can't just have one top six line loaded up, because once you get to the playoffs, that team then is just going to check that one line with Leon and Connor and Puljujärvi.
Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has been playing on McDavid's wing for the bulk of the season. The odd time when Draisaitl moves up. But how has that worked out for the Oilers? I mean, RNH isn't exactly lighting it up alongside McDavid, particularly 5-on-5, but even on the power play, we're not seeing a lot of offensive output, at least not what you would expect from a guy who's playing alongside McDavid on the number one line.
I mean, I'm a Nugent-Hopkins supporter. He's been a very good player for the Oilers since he was drafted. He's put up good numbers. I think at this point in his career, his 10th year, though, he's become a winger, not a center. I think he was drafted as a center. He played center a lot, but now he's not a second line center. If Leon plays with Connor, he's not a second line center because he can't drive his own line. I think he has to play wing, Nugent-Hopkins. But if he's playing wing, then Leon's got to go back to center. I think in an ideal world, the Oilers need Draisaitl playing center, because then that's a tougher matchup for an opposing team. To have Draisaitl on one line and McDavid on another line. If you look at the Oilers' top six, it's really not a top six, okay? They have three players you can say are top six players: McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent-Hopkins. Yamamoto and Puljujärvi are sort of top six. They haven't proven they're top six in terms of, racking up a lot of points. Certainly not this year.
And the way I see it is, the Oilers are missing, like if you think about pairings, right? Last year we saw that Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Yamamoto line really, cement itself or have great success. Particularly, we saw it when McDavid was injured for those few games, and they kept that line together, through much of the latter half of the season. But you've got that chemistry there between Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins and Yamamoto. But we're trying to find that chemistry with McDavid. Obviously he has chemistry with Draisaitl, but you need two pairings to be able to have those two lines be effective. And you're missing that winger for McDavid, the one who will, feed off of him, a la what we see happen when Draisaitl's there. Now, of course, we're talking an expensive player, and that's why Taylor Hall's name would come up.
The player the Oilers, Raquel is the player the Oilers should get.
Yeah.
First off, he's got another year in his contract. This isn't a rental. He's got another, and he makes under $4 million a year. He makes, I think, 3.7 or 3.8.
But he would cost the
Oilers a lot. He would cost the Oilers a lot.
Any team that wants him.
He's a good player. He's a player who can play with really good players. His history is he's more of a passer than a shooter, but he can play in a top six. If you're Anaheim, I see no reason why you would trade Raquel on a team with lots of young players. At least he's an older player in his prime. Why you would trade him just to say, oh, I'm going to trade him? Who would you have to get back from the Oilers? If you're trading Raquel to the Oilers, then Bob Murray's coming to the Oilers and says, I'll tell you what, I'll trade you Raquel, but I want Dylan Holloway.
That's what it would take.
Yeah.
Probably.
If I'm trading Raquel, who's more in his prime, I want a player like Holloway who I think can play in my team next year. And does Ken Holland want to do that? I don't know. It's
Does Ken Holland want to do it? Does he think this team is gonna have a stab at getting to the Stanley Cup this year? Is that realistic?
I think it's more realistic in the division they're in than it was before. If you win this division, you're in the Final Four. I think in Ken Holland's mind, he wants to win at least one playoff round and get into the second. I don't know if he thinks he's got a team that can win the Stanley Cup. I'm sure he probably doesn't think he has that much in his toolkit to win the Stanley Cup. But once the playoffs start, you never know. It's a balancing act with Ken. He's got two players in their prime in McDavid and Draisaitl, and Nurse who's really coming on, and he just doesn't want to throw away the season and say, we're not good enough, so I'm not trading to try to help the team now. I think every time there's a trading deadline, I can guarantee you the players are looking at the general manager saying, help us out a little bit here. We need something. You can't just go through the entire trading deadline and do nothing. So I think, they're looking for something. Ken's not the only guy trying to make a trade. We forget. Why don't you just go get Raquel? Well, you think Boston isn't going to try to get Raquel as well? Or other teams that are contenders, they're going to try to get the same players that the Oilers are looking for.
That's why there's a deadline, and that's why we don't see. Obviously Lamoriello made his move well before the deadline. That's why we don't see trades until the deadline happens, because there's more than just one suitor for these players.
Well, the smart guys often jump in a week before the trading deadline, get it done, and then they're not.
For all we know, Holland has been doing that, but so would half of the other general managers too.
Yep.
If they're worth their salt.
Yeah, and there's only
anything to think about is, sometimes you swing for the fences. Like last year when Holland dealt for Athanasiou from Detroit, he gave up a fairly princely sum, I would say.
He gave up something he didn't want to give up, and that was the second rounder this year too. He was. I'm in his heart of hearts. I'm sure he says I should have just given up a second rounder and a prospect, not given up 2 second-round picks. But you have to wonder whether the second-round pick this year was because he convinced Detroit to take Gagne's contract back. But I think there's a better chance he gets a third-line center, and it's the third line could be very important for the Oilers as well. If you played Archibald on the left side, because he's aggressive, and he kind of plays like that Brandon Tanev, who's in Pittsburgh now, used to be in Winnipeg. And if Cassian would start playing better on the right side and was aggressive, then you could find a center with some offense, and that would be a kind of line that would be an energy line and keep the puck in the other team's end. So far, Kara is a good fourth line center for the Oilers. A really good penalty killer, can play with Shore and Chase on, probably on a fourth line. And Haas is a fourth line center, but there's no third line center. And I don't think you can play in the NHL playoffs without a third line that plays 15 minutes a game, even strength.
David Desharnais is retired. That was the last time they went out and got a center who played basically around.
I mean, they're obviously they were hoping that Turris would be that guy. Okay,
yeah, absolutely.
But he hasn't been that guy, and he shows glimpses. And then that comes back to another problem for the Oilers. They're not great on faceoffs. They need somebody who wins a lot of faceoffs. So, trying to find a third line. The third line center they could have used went to the Islanders as well. Travis Zajac, a right shot, older, established center with still some offensive chops to his game, but he went to the Islanders as well from New Jersey.
Because, Luke Glendenning's name from Detroit has been floating around here for at least a couple of weeks, if not longer, as potential man to come to the Oilers. And I'm not sure what goes the other way, but is he really any better than what we have now?
He's a fourth line center, but he won more faceoffs than the other guys. But he's a fourth line center whose skating isn't as good as it used to be. He would be there to win a faceoff and, to be used a little later in the game when you got the lead, perhaps, as a center. But he doesn't move the dial as a third line center. What they give up, those sort of things you're not giving up very much. I think the Oilers would like to get, them to take a prospect rather than a draft pick, of which they don't have very many this season. We all know, Craig, that the Oilers have too many young defensemen. They have way too many defensemen, and there's only room for 6 to play in a game. So if they're trading anything, it would have, to my mind, it has to be a defenseman, a young defenseman.
All signs say that he's not going to be swinging for the fences this trade deadline. But like you said, the window is open right now, and McDavid and Draisaitl are in their primes. They're entering their primes.
I've known Ken Holland a long time. He rarely goes through a trading deadline without making some sort of moves. And, the fallback is that, as a fan, he says, he'll trade with Detroit again. He'll get another deal with Detroit. And I'm sure he knows Glendening better than anybody. He had him there for 6, 7, 8 years, and he knows who he is and what he isn't. And I just don't see it myself unless he looks at the stats. But no, look,
we didn't see Ryan Spooner as being somebody who should have.
Yeah. No, Ryan Strome would be a nice addition for the Edmonton Oilers, whose contract is up. Whose contract is up in New York. And I don't know why the Rangers would, depending on what the Oilers would give up. The Oilers aren't trading their first round draft choice, so not when they don't have any draft picks this year. So I think that we can forget that, even if where the Oilers are picking from 20 to 30 in the draft, it's still, and it's a crapshoot draft because, the teams the scouts haven't watched the players as much this year. I don't see it happening.